Hello everyone, this is Matteo, and in front of me I have all the pieces needed to build my first prop gun. Of course, I'm talking about Deckard's blaster from Blade Runner. In my mind, this is one of the most iconic props of the movie industry, and I'm so excited to finally being able to build it. So I printed everything with a resin 3D printer. The pieces came out great, but they still need a lot of post-processing. The handle especially needs to be perfect because you can see through, so all the 3D printing imperfections and layer lines and support marks have to be wiped out completely. When I was done with the sandpaper, I moved to a polishing paste. Here I'm applying way more paste than it is actually needed. I'm not even sure if it is actually working on resin, but maybe it helped just a little. The handle looks nice and shiny, so I convinced myself that it wasn't wasted time. Now it's time for a test fit. I threaded all the holes of camera and now I'm fastening the 4 screws on the handle. I'm very happy how it came out because the handle is made of 2 different resins and I wasn't sure about the shrinkage, but the seams on the sides are perfect, while the bottom side needs some sanding because that was the part where all the supports material was placed, and so I need some time sanding off the imperfections. Now that the handle is done, I can move to all the other pieces. Most of them will be painted with a metallic paint, so they also need to be very smooth, which means a lot of sanding. I used sandpaper from 800 up to 2000 grit, but I think at the end it was totally worth it. Enough with the sanding. I primed everything black and I am applying the metallic paint with an airbrush. I didn't want a very shiny metal, so I went for a steel or aluminum kind of paint. Here I'm using silver from the Vallejo metal color line of paint, which is an amazing line of metal colors. I really like all of them. They are acrylic, so very easy to use, and it's very easy also to clean the airbrush afterwards. And finally we can move on to the assembly, starting with the handle and the triggers. I used a simple pen spring cut in half for the triggers and some super glue to help with the assembly. The 3D model is really well designed and everything fits perfectly, and I had no issues with the assembly. Looking at the reference pictures, I noticed that the handle is actually black. So I'm now masking the parts that should stay metal and apply some black with the airbrush. Looking closely at the reference pictures, at the bottom of the handle, the black paint is actually weathered, so I'm going to apply some masking in that area that will help me later in the weathering phase. The white tape is a very handy tool from Tamiya. It is a masking tape that can be actually bent, and it's very useful when you need to mask features that are on a curve. And of course, the most satisfying part of the hobby is when you have to remove the masking tape. There, perfect. Before closing the handle with the two amber parts, I'm adding some dry brush to the metal inside. Not that you are going to see anything, so this part should be probably skipped, but you know, I guess it's part of the hobby, like when you paint the engine of an aircraft or whatever and then you close everything in the fuselage and you will never see it again. So yeah, it's something useless that makes you feel good, so indulge me, let me do it. Again, looking at the reference, I noticed that there is a spring inside the handle. I guess that in a real gun it is used for the hammer or whatever that thing is called. I don't have a spring of the right size, so I just wrapped some steel wire around a 6mm screw, and I got a perfect fictional spring for a fictional gun. Since I want this gun to have some physicity, I wanted it to be as heavy as possible, so I added ballast wherever I could. One perfect spot is inside the bullets. I'm using some epoxy resin and ball bearings to add weight, and I believe that this helped a lot in making the prop more believable. And it's finally time to assemble everything together. Up to this point I only had bits and pieces, and you don't really know if what you are doing is going to look good. And at this stage I started to get really excited about this project because I spent days before just sanding and painting, but I still didn't have the vision of how the gun was going to look. So now I'm finally realizing that what I'm doing is not that bad, so let me enjoy the assembly in silence. Before placing the amber parts, I gave them a rather thick layer of glossy varnish to make them even more shiny, and I believe that they came out really nice. So it's finally time for weathering. The original prop at this point is rather beaten up. From the reference I noticed really a lot of rust, but I don't want a one-to-one replica of the original. I want something with very light weathering. In my mind this is a well-kept gun at the beginning of its career that had a little bit of history, so I'm going to add some scratches and a little bit of weathering, but nothing too heavy, no excessive rust or broken parts like the original has. This is easier said than done because At least for me, light weathering is way more difficult to achieve than heavy weathering. It's very difficult to find that kind of weathering that tells a story about an item, but that doesn't go too far. So how to achieve light weathering? This time I'm trying with the salt technique. I applied a random texture on the surface with acrylic colors and a sponge. Then wet the surface with some water and sprinkled some salt over it. I then removed the excess, and that acts as a mask for the layer of metallic paint that I will apply all over the surface again. To reactivate the salt underneath, all I have to do is to damp with a lot of water and gently rub the surface with a brush or a cloth. The result is very nice. I probably should have been more aggressive with the underlying texture, but I'm going to add more weathering later with oil paints. Now I am assembling the few remaining parts and preparing for the last round of weathering that will be done with oils. I need to prepare the electronics inside the container under the gun. I desoldered the switch from the battery holder and glued it into a spot that is easily accessible. I also made two small circuit boards for the resistors because the LEDs were not of the right voltage, and spent a good half an hour trying to fit everything inside the small container. I also added the two green LEDs in what I believe is the viewfinder, and now I'm trying to connect them to the box that contains the battery. Moment of truth. And it's kinda working. The red LEDs works fine, but the connection to the green LEDs is a bit flaky, so I have to fix that, but not a big issue. Before coating everything with glossy varnish, I want to enhance the text on the barrel a little using enamel paint, and then removing the excess with white spirit and the help of a cotton bud. Now it's time for a thick layer of glossy varnish. This will protect all the work that we've done so far and will make further weathering much easier. So first of all, I'm dry brushing some metal paint. I'm using a very soft makeup brush because the result is much smoother compared to standard brushes. And when I'm happy with the result, I can finally move on to the oil paint weathering. This is probably the easiest and most satisfying weathering technique. All I have to do is smudge random colors all around the surface and remove the excess with a soft cloth. I of course try to use colors that suggest rust and dirt, so a lot of brown and orange and black and also a little bit of blue. I don't think that there is a way to make this wrong, just try to make it look natural, and of course dirt and grime will accumulate in the recesses. And yeah, apart from that, just go crazy and have fun, because this is very satisfying and really makes the prop pop. As a finishing touch, I'm adding some homemade pigments on the handle. It was really too shiny and didn't match anymore with the rest of the weathered gun, and we can call it done. And now to some vanity shots. Thanks for sticking with me. I hope you find this video inspirational in some way, and see you next time. Ciao!